his entire family life here with uh, with the Century. Reminiscences by Kim Il Sung. Today we're on chapter 5, The Song of the River Amnak. One day, in early 1923, my father told me to sit at his side and asked me what my intention was having finished my primary education. I said I wanted to go to secondary school. That was also my parents' long cherished desire, and I wondered why he was asking such an obvious question. He said with a serious look that I should go to the homeland and continue to study there. This advice was unexpected. Studying in Korea meant leaving the care of my parents, something I had never considered. My mother, who was sewing, was surprised and asked if I couldn't study somewhere nearby, for I was still young. My father seemed to have made a determination. He repeated that I must go, though we might miss one another for a time. He would never change his decision without a proper reason. He said in earnest, "You have suffered a lot of hardship, moving with us from place to place since your childhood. You may find yourself in a worse plight when you are in Korea again. Nevertheless, I am determined to send you there. A man born in Korea must have a good knowledge of Korea. If you get to understand clearly while you are in Korea why she has been ruined, that will be a great achievement. Share the fate of the people in your hometown and experience how miserable they are. Then you will see what you should do." He said that I would do as he told me to. I said that I would do as he told me to do. In those days, the rich people in Korea were sending their sons to study abroad. They believed that the United States or Japan was the place to seek modern civilization and academic pursuits. And that was the trend of the times. So I was going to Korea while others were going abroad. My father's way of thinking was unique. As I recollect the event, I think he was right in sending me to Korea. Anyhow, he was no ordinary man to send his scarcely 11-year-old son on a 250-mile journey alone through a then uninhabited land. His character served me as an encouragement and filled me with confidence. To be frank, my feelings at that time were not simple. I was happy to hear that I was to study in the homeland, but I didn't want to leave my parents and younger brothers. However, I was eager to see my hometown. I spent several restless days with mixed feelings of yearning for my hometown and reluctance to leave the sweet family atmosphere. Another 50 stream streak from Street Cat. Let's go. Thank you, comrade. My mother asked my father if it wouldn't be better to send me when the weather was warmer. She was afraid of sending her young son on a 250-mile journey alone. My father did not agree with this suggestion either. Though anxious over her son's long journey, my mother spent the nights making me an overcoat and socks so that I might start on the date appointed by my father. She did not dispute her husband's decision, as was her trait. On the day of my departure, my father told me that it was 250 miles from Badaogao to Mangyangdae, and asked me whether I could walk all the way alone. I replied that I could. Then he drew the route in my pocketbook, marking off the names of the major places on the way as well as the distance between them. For instance, from Huchang to the next place, from Hypyeong to the next, and so on. He further told me to send him 2 telegrams, one from Gyeonggi and one from Pyongyang. On the last day of the first lunar month, March 16th by the solar calendar, I left Bao Dao Gao. A snowstorm was severe from the morning. My friends in Baodaogao accompanied me for 7.5 miles to the south of Hachang across the river Amnak to see me off. They insisted on accompanying me the whole way, so I had trouble to persuade them to return home. As I began my journey, various thoughts flooded my mind. For more than half of the 250 miles of my journey, I would have to walk over steep, craggy mountains which were virtually uninhabited. It would not be easy to cross them alone. Even in full daylight, beasts of prey prowled about the woods on both sides of the road from Hachang to Kangyi. I suffered a lot during the journey. I really had a hard time of it while crossing the Jik Pass and K Pass, Mungnam Pass, and the like. It took me a whole day to cross the passes of Mount Oga. When I had crossed one pass, another would appear. It seemed there was no end. As I crossed Mount Oga, I got blisters on my feet. At the foot of the mountain, I fortunately met an old man who cured my blisters by burning them with matches. After Wolthan and Mount Oga, I passed through Hupyong, Huksu, Kangyi, Songgang, Jonchan, Coin, Chogun, Hoichan, Yangsan, Kujang, and arrived in Kachan, and then proceeded to Mangyeongdae by rail. A narrow gauge railway service was available from Kachan to Sinanju. A light train pulled by a small English locomotive, Nikisha, covered the route. From Sinanju to Pyongyang, a wide gauge railway, as we have today, was working. At that time, a rail ticket from Kachan to Pyongyang cost 1 won, 90 jang. During that journey, I met many kind-hearted people. Once, when I was suffering from sore feet, I was picked up by a peasant and on an ox-drawn sleigh. When parting, I offered him some money, but he declined and bought me some toffee instead. Let's go, toffee. Toffee for the road. Yeah, I didn't know about that. I guess. Maybe blister hack, question mark. The most memorable of them was the innkeeper in Kangyi. I arrived at Kangyi late in the evening and came to the inn. The innkeeper came out to the gate and received me cordially. He was a small man who wore his hair in the Western fashion and dressed in Korean jacket and trousers. He was affable and sociable. He told me that he had received a telegram from my father and was expecting me. His elderly mother, referring respectfully to my father as Mr. Kim, was as glad to see me as if I were her own grandson. She said, "When you were here with your father 4 years ago on your way to Junggang, you were a small boy, but now you are quite grown up." She served me with beef rib soup and fried herrings, which she had probably been saving for her own grandchildren. She made a bed for me with new quilts. They showered me with full hospitality. The next morning I went to Kangyi post office and sent a telegram to my parents as my father had told me to do. The telegram would cost me 3 jan for each of the first 6 characters and 4 jan for any more. So I wrote 6 characters. Kangyi Mu Sa Tu Chak. Arrived safely in Kangyi. The next day, the innkeeper went to the bus station to arrange for my transport. On returning, he told me that I should have to wait for about 10 days because the bus had broken down. He added that he had made a reservation for me, so I should stay with him. I was grateful for his kindness, but it said I could not afford to wait. Did not hold me back any more, but offered me 2 pairs of straw sandals. Moreover, he introduced me to a cartman who was heading for the K Pass. The keeper of the West Korea Inn in front of Kachan railway station was also a kind man. At the inn, I ordered a 15 John meal, which was the cheapest of the meals they served there. However, the innkeeper served me with a 50 John meal. When I said I could not afford it, he told me not to mind the cost. At night, they gave me a mattress and 2 blankets to each guest for 50 John. I examined my purse and found that I could not afford the luxury of sleeping under 2 blankets, so I ordered only 1 blanket. Again, the innkeeper told me not to worry about the cost and said he could not be so cruel as to see a boy sleeping miserably when other travelers were comfortable. He was like about 10 years old, is what he said. Though living in poverty as a ruined nation, the Korean people still preserved their traditional fellowship and beautiful customs. Up until the turn of the century, there were many people traveling without money in our country. Villagers used to provide free accommodation for travelers. This was a Korean custom, which was the envy of the people of the West. My journey made me realize that the Korean people were truly kind-hearted and morally excellent. The keeper of the West Korea Inn, like those of Gangyi and Jungang Inns, was under guidance and influence of my father. As I had experienced on my previous journey to Jungang at the age of 7, my father had comrades and friends everywhere. When I saw people receiving and taking care of our family as their own flesh and blood, I wondered where my father had made so many friends, and what distance he had traveled to rally such comrades. With so many friends everywhere, my father, when away from home, was always helped by them. I too benefited a great deal from their assistance. An unforgettable memory of my journey was the town of Gangyi, lit by oil lamps 4 years before, being flooded with electric light. The townsfolk were happy with the introduction of electric light, but I was sad at the sight of the streets because they seemed to be more Japanese. The profound meaning of what my father had said to me on my departure about learning about Korea came home to me. As I remembered his instructions, I closely studied my unfortunate homeland. The 250-mile journey was, for me, a journey of learning about my homeland and my fellow countrymen. Towards sunset on March 29th, 1923, 14 days after my departure at Bad Dao Gai, I entered the courtyard of my old home. My grandmother, who was making yard inside, hurried out to the yard without stopping to put on her shoes and took me in her arms. "Who has come with you? How have you come? How are your father and mother?" She showered me with questions, giving me no time to answer. Grandfather stopped making straw mats and ran out into the yard. When I answered that I had come alone on foot, she explained doubtfully, "Oh Lord, really? Your father is more hard-hearted than a tiger." The whole family sat together, and we talked all through the night. The mountains and rivers were familiar and beautiful as ever, but the signs of poverty in every corner of the village were more conspicuous than ever before. After staying for a few days at Mongyangdae, I started in the 5th year at Chengduk School, where my grandfather on my mother's side was the head teacher. This was the beginning of my education in the homeland. From that time on, I stayed in my mother's maiden home in Shilgul to attend school. My mother's parents were in no position to support me. They were having a difficult time because my mother's brother, Kang Jin-suk, was in prison. After his arrest, the police kept the family under strict surveillance, bothering them, and, worse still, my uncle was in poor health. The whole family worried about him. The family were living in dire poverty, eating gruel made from coarsely ground grain or boiled rice mixed with ground beans. They always ran short of farm produce, and my younger uncle had to carry goods on a cart for hire to eke out a livelihood. However, they did not reveal any signs of poverty in my presence and supported me wholeheartedly while I attended school. They provided me with a separate room furnished with kerosene lamp and fine floor mats. They were kind to my friends, who used to visit me at all times. Jangduk School was a progressive institution established by my grandfather on my mother's side, and other far-sighted people from Chilgo and the surrounding area, and aimed at promoting the restoration of national sovereignty as part of the patriotic movement for cultural enlightenment. Towards the end of the Ri dynasty, and after the annexation of Korea by Japan, a brisk patriotic education movement was launched as a link in the whole chain of the national salvation movement. The pioneers and patriots who attributed the shameful loss of national sovereignty to the backwardness of the country regarded education as the foundation of the fundamental factor in self-development, and clearly realized that unless education was developed, neither the independence of the country nor the modernization of society could be achieved. So they established private schools throughout the country. This movement was led by patriotic figures such as An Chung Ho, Ri Tong Hui, Ri Sung Hun, Ri Sang Ji, Yu Kil Jun, Nam Kung O, and others. The learned societies formed in all parts of the country and pushed ahead with the education movement. At the height of the educational and cultural movement that swept the country, thousands of private schools sprang up, awakening the intellect of the nation that had slept in feudal fetters. It was around this time that village schools had been teaching the doctrines of Confucius and Mencius, were transformed into institutions for modern education, and encouraged the younger generation to kindle the spirits of patriotism. The leaders of the nationalist movement, without exception, regarded education as the starting point of independence movement, and concentrated their financial power on the energy of this undertaking. Kim Koo, who was the mastermind behind the heroic ventures undertaken by Ri Peng Jung and Yun Peng Gil, with terrorism as his major policy for the independence movement, had been engaged in education in Hanghi province in his early years. An Jung-gun, too, was a scholar who had established a school in the area of Nampo to teach the younger generation. Among the private schools established in West Korea, Taesong School in Pyongyang, supervised by Ang Cheng-ho, and Osun School by Jung Yu, financed by Ri Sung-hung, were famous. These schools produced many famous patriotic fighters for independence and intellectuals. My grandfather used to say that it would be an honor for Changduk School if it could produce only one great man, such as An Jung-gun, and that I should study hard to become a prominent patriot. I replied that even though I might not become such a praiseworthy martyr as An Jung-gun, I would become a patriot who would not spare himself for the independence of the country. Of the private schools established in West Korea, Changduk School was fairly large and modern, with more than 200 pupils. The school was in a position to promote the enlightenment of the people in its vicinity. Therefore, the people and public spirited men in the Pyongyang area attached great importance to Changduk School, and spared nothing in support of it. Pak Sun-hyung, too, contributed a vast amount of money to this school. This woman, better known as Widow Peak than by her real name, was popular in Pyongyang before liberation for her charitable efforts. Widowed before the age of 20, she remained faithful to her dead husband until the age of 80, becoming rich by saving every penny she earned. Well, see, now these kind of private schools are different. These are the private schools that have to exist because of Japanese colonialism, you see. Her way of making money was so bold and unique that she was the focus of public attention from her early days. It is said that the site of the present limestone mine belonging to Songhori Cement Factory was once her property. She had bought the Rocky Mountain, which nobody cared for, at a low price, and sold it to a Japanese capitalist for dozens of times more than she had paid. Yeah, so like, because during Japanese occupation, obviously, it was like Japanese education was what was legal. So these patriots were setting up schools that were private schools, and I mean, some of them, some of them had to charge in order to exist, but some of them tried to charge as little as possible, right? But yeah, and that was kind of like part of the beginning of like the movement for liberation there in Korea within the borders itself, where the guerrilla fighters could fight outside of Korea mostly. Because the Japanese eyes, while they were still on them outside of Korea, they didn't have as much sway, they didn't have as much power. And so that's why like he was saying, if you remember at the beginning, he was saying like it was the trend at the time in Korea for rich people to send their kids abroad, right? So they were sending their kids abroad to get like the Western style educations and stuff. And then meanwhile, you had these private education centers set up for people who obviously could not afford such a thing. And they were teaching people about like the labor history of Korea and the anti-colonial struggle, and like why feudalism was not good, and the weakness that feudalism allowed the weakness of feudalism that allowed Japanese occupation to win, right? All of these things. So it's not private school like we know of. It's private school because Japanese occupation exists, and all public schools have to go by the Japanese education curriculum. So the only way to exist outside of that is these private schools. And even then, they would often be shut down. This woman, who did not even know how to use an abacus.
I've got some literature in my car that will change your whole way of thinking.
Yo, Salty, thank you so much for the resubby. This woman, who did not even know how to use an abacus, had made this fabulous profit in a deal with the Japanese capitalists at a time when public resentment was running high at the traders who had sold out the country to the Japanese imperialists with the signing of a paper. That is why people took pleasure in talking about her as if she were a great war hero. People respect her because she had helped the community a great deal. Even though she was rich, she did not seek personal glory. She had led a simple life, eating frugal meats, and donated her money unsparingly to society. Money she had saved all her life. The money she had spent on building a bridge and a public hall, the Pyongyang Public Hall, which still remains intact before the Rongyang Pavilion. A few days after I began school, my grandfather brought me a bundle of fifth-year textbooks. In excitement, I took them and turned over the pages one after another. But when I opened the textbook titled Mother Tongue Reader, I felt offended. It was a textbook of the Japanese language. The Japanese imperialists forced our people to use the Japanese language in order to make them the subjects of the Japanese emperor. And soon as they had occupied our country, they proclaimed that the official language of the government and public offices, courts, and schools would be Japanese, and prohibited the Korean people from using their own language. I asked my grandfather why the Japanese language book was titled Mother Tongue Reader. He merely heaved a sigh. With a pocket knife, I scratched out the word mother tongue from the title of the book and wrote in its place the word Japanese. The Mother Tongue Reader became the Japanese Reader in an instant. My urge to resist Japan's assimilation policy encouraged me to act with such resolution. After I had been at school for some days, I found a few children speaking Japanese in the classrooms, streets, and playgrounds. Some of them were even teaching Japanese to other children. Nobody seemed to feel ashamed of this or criticized it. They seemed to think that our language was disappearing forever, with the country ruined. Whenever I saw children trying to learn Japanese, I told them that Koreans must speak Korean. The day I arrived in Chilgol, after my return to the homeland from Bao Gai, the villagers gathered at my mother's maiden home to hear about the situation. They said they wanted to hear me speak Chinese, as they thought I might speak it well after living for some years in Manchuria. Even children at Chengduk School often pestered me to teach them Chinese, but I would refuse, asking them why we should speak a foreign language when we had our own excellent language. Only once did I speak Chinese in the homeland. One day, my mother's brother asked me to go sightseeing in the city with him. Because he was usually very busy, he seldom went outings. But that day he managed to find time for me, saying that as I had been away for a long time, he would buy me lunch in the city that day. He took me to Pyongyang. After touring the city, we entered a Chinese restaurant in the western part of the city. In those days, there were many Chinese restaurants in the area where Pakwasan Hotel now stands. In order to earn more money, the restaurant keepers would come out to the door and receive customers kindly, saying, "Welcome." They vied with each other to attract guests. The keeper of the restaurant we went to asked us in poor Korean what we would like to eat. I ordered in Chinese for his convenience, 2 plates of Chinese pancakes. Wide-eyed, he asked me if I was a Chinese pupil. I said that though not a Chinese pupil, I knew some Chinese because I lived in Manchuria for some years. Then I chatted with him in Chinese for a while. The restaurant keeper was very glad to see me, a young boy who had a good command of Chinese. He said with tearful eyes that he was reminded of his homeland on seeing a pupil from Manchuria. He placed dishes we had not ordered on the table, as well as the pancakes, and told us to eat plenty. We declined, but he insisted, so we ate everything. After our meal, we tried to pay the bill, but he would not even take payment for the pancakes. On our way home, Uncle said, laughing, "I took you to the city to give you a treat, but instead you gave me a treat." The whole village heard of this episode. As I had hoped, I joined the class of Mr. Kang Rang-yuk. I had gone to stay at Chilgol not long after Mr. Kang left Sungsil School and began teaching at Changduk School. He was very sorry to have left the middle school, but he was unable to pay his fees. His family was so poor that his wife, Sung Suk Jung, left him to stay at her maiden home for a while. It is said that her parents admonished her severely, saying, "You may not be a good wife in time of destitution for lack of grace, but how dare you abandon your husband because you were tired of poverty? How many households are there in Korea which are not as poor as his? Did you expect to eat rice with honeyed water sitting on a golden cushion after you married? Speak no more and return to him at once and apologize to him." Unquote. I do not think the reader will need further explanation to understand the situation of Mr. Kang's family. We called his wife Sukchung Auntie, for she came from Sukchung, South Pyeonggang Province. Whenever I went to his house, Sukchung Auntie would serve me with rice mixed with ground beans. I ate it with relish. I feel that the Sukchung Auntie thing hits hard. Not the same name, but the auntie part, for sure. One day after liberation, I went to Mr. Kang's to wish him a happy birthday, and talked to his wife, recollecting what I ate in those days. Silver Spook, welcome in. Good to see you. I hope you're well. Hey, Silver Spook, you should think about joining our Discord, comrade. We're creating. I've got a whole new Discord now, Silver Spook, and we're creating a whole new we're creating a whole new we're creating a whole new Twitch group. We need a tanky Twitch group, right? Much like BreadTube, but for tankies. And that's what I'm trying to create. So if you're interested in that, you should think about joining our new Discord. Right there, there's the link. It's the People's Republic of Fork, it's called. And yeah, we would love. I think you would be you would be a fantastic addition, in my opinion, to our little tanky tube endeavor. So yeah, something to consider on your end. Think about joining our Discord and having a look. It's a whole new thing that we're doing. A whole new Discord, whole new plans. Give man a bread for a day, and he will eat. And give a man a tank, and he will eat for the rest of his life. Exactly. I'm working on that chart I shared in commissariat while listening. Oh, that's fantastic. Hell yes. Yeah. Something to think about, Silver Spook. No peer pressure, but I've made partner now, so I realize that I can now make an official Twitch group. And by the way, we're reading Kim Il Sung's life story with the century. We've just joined Kim Il Sung on his 250-mile journey from China all the way back to his hometown at 10 years old. And he was just recalling this Sukchun auntie that used to give him food and all the time and always treated him really nice in the neighborhood. And so here he's saying, one day after liberation, I went to Mr. Kang's to wish him a happy birthday and talk to his wife. Recollect him what I ate in those days. Quote, Madam, on occasions I still recall the rice mixed with ground beans you would serve me in Chilgol. You can't imagine how I enjoyed it. Having been away from the homeland for 20 years, I could not thank you for it. Please accept my thanks today. Unquote. To this she replied with tearful eyes. My family was so poor that I served you only rice mixed with ground beans, not proper rice. But as you say you were grateful for that, I do not know what to say. Those meals were never tasty. Saying that she would make up for her poor treatment of me in my days at the Cheongduk school, she served me with dishes she had cooked herself. One year, she sent me some wine called Pak Hugh Ji, which she had distilled, to wish me a happy birthday. The name of the wine means distilled from 100 flowers. The poetic name of the wine aroused my interest, but I could not drink it with a light heart because the vision of her struggling against hunger with no proper meal of boiled rice swam before my eyes. For me, who had felt to the marrow of my bones the misery of a ruined nation, a tree, a blade of grass, and a grain of rice in the homeland seemed many times more precious than they were before. Moreover, the teacher steadily inspired the pupils with national consciousness. So I was constantly under a patriotic influence at home and at school. In those days, he organized picnics and excursions frequently to inculcate patriotism in the pupils. An excursion to Mount Jungbang in the Hunghe province was particularly noteworthy. After liberation, Kang Kyung-yuk, the Secretary General of the Standing Committee of the Supreme People's Assembly, and the Vice President of the Republic, had many opportunities to meet me in connection with his work. We would recall with emotion the excursions we went on during our days at the Cheongduk School, and how we had seen Sungbol Temple, and the Namdam Pavilion, and Mount Jungbang. Another unforgettable event of those days was the music lessons he gave. His music lessons were particularly interesting, so we used to look forward to them. He had a wonderful voice, which sounded better than professional tenors. When he sang the song, A Song of Advance or The Song of Young Patriot, the whole class listened with bated breath. I think the melodies of the songs he taught us infused patriotic feelings into our minds. Later, when waging the anti Japanese armed struggle, I would often sing those songs, and I still remember their words and melodies clearly. Yeah, it's the kitchen here. It'll stop in a second. Yeah, it's the kitchen. It'll stop in a minute. I think the melodies. Sorry, I just said that part. Back in the homeland, I found that people were poorer than before. When spring sowing began, the children, the very poor, would be absent from school, for they had not to help in the farming, but also to gather mulgi, pick purse, the roots of bindweed, and other herbs to supplement their meals when the grain ran out. Yeah, no, it's just people not stopping the timer. There were some boys who would go to the city on market days and sell wild vegetables to buy grain, and others would babysit at home for their parents. Children from poor families would eat boiled sorghum, foxtail millet, or a barnyard millet for lunch. Worse still, some had to skip lunch. In Chilgol and Mungyangdae, there were many families that could not afford school education for their children. It was a pity to see children cooped up in their homes with no access to schooling because they were so poor. For such children, I would organize night classes wherever I could, whenever I went to Mungyangdae on the holidays. I called them all to the classes and taught them. I began by teaching them the Korean alphabet with the Korean reader, and then taught history, geography, arithmetic, and songs. It was simple enlightenment that I undertook for the first time in my life. While visiting the city frequently with my friends, I came to realize that citizens of Pyongyang were leading a no better life than the people of Mungyangdae or Chilgol. Of the 100,000 people living in Pyongyang, only a small number of Japanese and Americans were living well. The Americans in Singyang-ri, the most beautiful part of Pyongyang, lived in luxury, and the Japanese made their settlements in Panjung and Hungamgan, the most thriving places in Pyongyang, and lived in clover. In the Westerners' village, inhabited by Americans and the Japanese settlers, brick houses, shops, and churches increased in number. On the other hand, in the places as the area along the river Pathang and Pyongyang and Vekte Street, the slum quarters were getting bigger. Now, with the construction of such modern streets as Komilla, Konghang, Konghua Street, and of such large buildings as the People's Palace of Culture, the Pyongyang Indoor Stadium, the Ice Ring, the Changhua Health Complex, and skyscrapers, no evidence of old Pyongyang can be found. But when I was going to Chakduk School, many small slum dwellings with straw mat doors and board roofings were huddled there. In the year when I returned home, there was an epidemic in Pyongyang and the surrounding area, torturing the people. To make matters worse, the whole city was suffering from the flooding. Reporting the disaster caused by that year, Tong Ilbo said that about 10,000 houses, or half the total number of houses in Pyongyang, had been submerged. Today, 105-storied Rungyang Hotel, the tallest hotel in the world, is being built in Pyongyang Square. But the younger generation will not be able to imagine the misery their grandfathers and grandmothers suffered in small slums in the same place in those years. While living through the miseries, I came to aspire to a society where the toiling masses could live happily and harbor a bitter hatred for the Japanese imperialist aggressors, the landlords, and capitalists. When I was a pupil at Changduk School, there were great earthquakes in the Kanto region of Japan, and the news reached Chilgol, sparking the anger of my schoolmates. Rumor had it that Japan's ultra-rightists had instigated the army to massacre thousands of Koreans living in Japan, under the pretext that Koreans taking advantage of the earthquakes were planning to revolt. This came as a great shock to me. But it gave me a clearer understanding that Japan, even though she was preaching impartiality and Japan-Korea harmony, despised Korean people, treating them as worse than beasts. From that time, I would not allow Japanese policemen on bicycles to pass with impunity. I would bury spiked boards in their way, and their tires always went flat. Feelings of hatred for the Japanese imperialists and of love for our motherland were reflected in the musical play 13 Houses we produced. In this play, 13 pupils appeared on the stage and sang and danced while assembling a map of Korea, each pupil taking a map of cardboard of each of 13 provinces of Korea. We staged this musical at a school athletics meeting in the autumn of 1924. In the middle of the performance, a policeman appeared in the playground and ordered us to stop at once. In those days, holding a small-scale athletics meeting required approval from the police. And even an approved event had to have police surveillance. I met my teacher, Rang Yuk-uk, and said, "What is wrong in our loving the motherland and singing and dancing in praise of it?" I insisted that we continue our performance, come what may. He, with other teachers, protested against the unjustifiable conduct of the policemen, and told us to continue the performance. Since we primary school children had such a high spirit of patriotism and resistance, is there any need to say more about the adult spirit? In the summer of the year when I returned to the homeland, a general strike broke out in Pyongyang hosiery factory. The newspapers gave front-page headlines to this event. At the news, I thought, even though Japan was advertising her deceptive civil government, she would sooner or later have to face resistance greater than the March 1st popular uprising. Thus, I spent 2 years, one day, a few months before. Thus, I spent 2 years. One day, a few months before I left. One day, a few months before I left school, I heard from my mother's father that my father had been arrested again by the Japanese police. This was a great shock. I felt terrible anger and hatred towards the enemy. The distressed people of Chilgo and Myeongdae seemed to examine my face. I made preparations for a journey with determination to fight at the risk of my life to take revenge on the enemy of my father, my family, and my nation. When I said I would go to Baodaogao, my mother's family advised me to go after finishing at school. My grandfather, Myeongdae, also tried to dissuade me, saying that I should wait a few months until I had finished school and the weather was warmer. But I could not wait. I thought, how could I study here when misfortune has befallen my father? I must go at once and help mother with her young sons. I must do my bit wherever it means going. Knowing that he could not dissuade me, grandfather relented and said that I should do as I was determined, and that it was up to me now that my father was behind bars. The next day the family saw me off. The whole family wept, grandfather, grandmother, and my uncle. My mother's younger brother, Kang Chang-suk, who came to Pyongyang Station to see me off, and Kam Yun-bun, my classmate from Chilgo, also wept in sadness. My most intimate friend at Cheongduk School was Kang Gun-bun. He had no one to whom he could open his heart, so he would come to see me frequently. We would often go to the city together. When the time came for the train to depart, he gave me some boiled rice and a pack and an envelope. He told me that, as he was not sure when he would see me again, he had jotted down a few words for me to read on the train. I opened the envelope after the train had left. In it were a short letter and 3 won. I was very moved by the letter and the money. No one without a good heart could be so considerate towards his friend. In those days, it was not easy for a boy to obtain 3 won. Even though I had started out on the journey determined to avenge my father, money was a serious problem. He saved me from many difficulties. It seemed that he had gone to a great deal of difficulty in getting the money. He came to see me after liberation. The first thing I told him was how grateful I had been for the money 20 years before, to which he confessed that he had great difficulty in obtaining it. That money was more precious to me than millions of won to a rich man. What can compare with all the pure and beautiful feelings of friendship that produce the 3 won? Money cannot buy friendship, but friendship can produce money and everything else. He said that while I had been fighting in the mountains to liberate the country, he had done nothing in particular. I said that we should combine our efforts and build a new country, and that the shortage of cadres was an obstacle to nation building. I asked him if he could do his bit by helping to build schools. He steadily agreed. After a short time, he had set up a school in Jochung and asked me to give it a name. I named it the school Sumhung Middle School. Sumhung means the thriving of knowledge, morality, and physique. In other words, it meant the school that should train the pupils to be knowledgeable, morally sound, and physically strong. Bry, welcome in, comrade. Afterwards, he took charge of the setting up of the university. These days, building a university is no great problem. But there were many difficulties at that time because we had neither funds, building materials, nor skilled builders. Whenever we had a problem with his work, he would come to see me and discuss the problems with me throughout the night, staying in my house. Kang Yun-bum was an unforgettable comrade and friend who saw me off on my way to national liberation. I still remember him as he saw me off in tears at the Pyongyang station that day. The letter he gave me read, "Dear Sungju, when parting with you, I cannot keep back my tears. When shall we meet again after this parting? Let us remember our days at Changduk School, even if a vast distance lies between us. Let us remember our hometown and our motherland." Encouraged by his friendship and moral support, I again negotiated one steep pass after another. In the evening of the 13th day after my departure from Myeongdae, I arrived at Pyongyang. Having reached the ferry, I hesitated to cross the Amnak. I walked the bank of the river restlessly. The mountains and rivers of my homeland held me back from crossing over to Baodaogao. I was held back by a vision of grandmother and grandfather, who had seen me off at the Bushwood Gate, weeping, stroking my hands, adjusting my dress, and worrying about possible snowstorms. I felt I could not hold back the tears that welled up if I crossed the river. And looking back at my motherland in misery, at the bleak border, I could scarcely suppress the impulse to rush back to my hometown, to the house where I was born. I had spent only 2 years back in my motherland, but I had learned and experienced much in those years. My most valuable experience was to have acquired a deep understanding of our people. Our people were simple, industrious, yet brave, and strong-willed. They were staunch people who did not yield whatever the adversity or hardship. They were polite and kind-hearted, and yet resolute and uncompromising against injustice. When the national reformers were conducting the reactionary autonomy campaign in the name of the Yeongjong Association, the popular masses, particularly the workers, peasants, young people, and students, were shedding their blood in resistance to the Japanese imperialists. From the image of them, I felt an undaunted sense of national dignity, an unbreakable spirit of independence. From that time, I believed that our people were the greatest in the world, and that I could liberate the country if I organized their efforts properly. While seeing the Japanese army and the number of police and prisons increasing with each passing day behind. Okay, cool. I think we're near the end of this chapter, I do believe. Oh, yes, you're perfect timing, Julia. While seeing the Japanese army and the number of police and prisons increasing with each passing day, behind the screen of civil government, and looking at the wagons and cargo ships carrying the wealth plundered from our nation, I formed a clear understanding that Japanese imperialism was the most heinous destroyer of the liberty and dignity of our people, and a vicious aggressor and plunderer imposing unbearable poverty and hunger upon our people. The oppressive situation in the motherland gave me a firmer belief that only through a struggle would the Korean nation be able to drive out the Japanese imperialists and live in happiness in a liberated country. My desire to liberate my country as quickly as possible and turn everything into ours, into Korea's, burned in my heart. I walked a little way down from the ferry to the rapids to evade police observation and set foot on the frozen river. Across the river, which was only 34 meters wide, was the town of Baodaogao, and my house, which was in the street near the river bank. But I hesitated again, obsessed by the uncertainty of whether I would ever cross back to my homeland, to which I was going to bid farewell. I stepped back and picked up a pebble from the river bank, holding it firmly in my hand. I wished to take everything that I could to be a token and a memento of my motherland, and to keep it as a treasure. That day, I underwent a truly painful psychological experience, because this had left a wound in my heart. At the banquet given by my patriots in the homeland in my honor after my triumphal return home, I spoke first about that experience. I walked slowly towards the opposite side of the river, singing quietly the song of the river Amnok. On the first of March of the 19th year, I crossed the river Amnok. The day will come round every year. I'll return when my work is done. Blue waters of Amnok, my homeland, wait the day I return to you. I cross to attain our dearest wish. I'll return when we have won. I look back at the mountains in the motherland over and again with sorrow and indignation. I thought, my dear Korea, I am leaving you. I know I cannot live, even for a moment, away from you, but I am crossing the Amnok to win you back. Across this river is a foreign land, but I will not forget you, even in there. Wait for me, my Korea. Then I sang the song again. As I sang the song, I wondered when I would be able to tread this land again. When I would return to this land where I grew up and where my forefathers' graves lay. Young as I was, I could not repress my sorrow at this thought. Picturing in my mind the miserable reality of the motherland, I made a grim resolve not to return before Korea had become independent.